welcome to some new units. We're going to talk about groups and organizations, and as you've already noticed before, I've grouped some of these chapters together. There's obvious links. Between small groups and larger organizations. However, I'm going to break these down. We're going to cover small groups in week 11, and then I'm going to include the second half of this the following week in week 12 on organizational communication. Just an update. Seems like things are going pretty well overall. I mean, I know that for really most of us, this is kind of an individual endeavor. It's kind of hard not to be working with others, ironically, especially when we're talking about small groups and organizations. Overall, I'm okay with how things are going. I've heard from pretty much everybody, just a few people I haven't from. Otherwise, a lot of people are being active. A lot aren't really either, so you may be hearing from me, and I'd really appreciate it if you just kind of took it on yourself. I know it's hard. I know you got a lot of responsibilities. You got other classes and work and family issues, etc. But try to keep up with things. Try to keep it reasonable for what's expected in this class. I didn't really want to add anything, so we just have some extra discussion to do each week and some participation activities, but try to keep up with that and continue to communicate with me individually by calling or texting or emailing, or we can do Google Meet, etc. As well. So coming up on Friday the 3rd is the second exam finally. Please make a note of that. It'll be available that Friday at 9 a.m. and needs to be turned in at 9 a.m. Saturday the 4th. It's just going to be a Word document that you can download, put your answers, highlight your answers right on the document, save and upload before Friday at 9 a.m. Please try not to miss that. It's open book, so have your materials with you, and I'm going to look for some thoughtful answers on the short answer. So also mark your calendar and confirm exactly what it is for each of your sections. Of my 3 sections, the final exam date is on the 28th or 29th. So it's going to be the same situation as the second exam. It's not the exam on the final exam date's not cumulative. It's just going to cover the last 4 chapters, and it's going to be the same deal as the previous one. So again, please participate. Please take part in the discussions. There's an extra one each week now that's relevant to the particular topic or whatever else is going on. Do the quizzes. After quiz 7, there's only going to be 3 more. Those are going to be in the last 3 weeks of the class, and they're all online, interactive, and make progress on the paper. Read the written instructions. Check out the video I put together explaining it a little more. Talk to me directly. It's a 3 to 5 paper on a communication concept, and you're applying it to something in your life or something else. So that's going to be due on the 24th, right at the end of this term, but it's due before exams start. Also on your calendar of week 12, Monday of week 12, Troy Case from the Career Internship Center is going to be our guest, and he's going to be leading an activity, and so that'll be live, and so hope to see many of you there. We were going to do an activity in class, so you can read this slide, and again I'm going to put these slides up just as a PowerPoint too, and I'm going to try to alter this so we can do it remotely. There are ways, of course, that we can work in groups through technology, but just because this wasn't planned, this would be a little too difficult to try to pull off, unfortunately. So it's an activity where you identify important issues on the campus, even though none of us are on campus, strictly speaking, right now, but we'll do something with that later in this week. The topics that we're going to be covering, we're going to talk about, we're going to give a definition of group and team communication, its rise in society. We'll talk about limitations and strengths. We're going to talk about the features of cohesion, size, structure, patterns, and norms. Decision making is a big part of small group work. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about, again, some of the lessons to be learned in small group work. Next week, we're going to cover organizational communication. We'll talk about some of the key features. We're going to talk about culture too. You've heard that term come up over and over again in this class. Organizations have cultures. They have certain vocabularies, stories, rites and rituals, structures and rules. And again, there's some lessons to be learned there. One of them is that you're going to be moving out of teams and organizations throughout your lives. Albion will be one of those organizations. And then once you start your professional careers, chances are you're going to be moving in and out of more than a few during the course of your professional lives. Groups have become more important in our society. Technology has certainly facilitated that, but mainly it's because groups actually outperform individuals in a number of ways, okay? And so there's advantages to doing group work. Of course, there's many, many different types of groups, both formal and informal. And we'll make a distinction there. Probably most of the groups you're in are just informal, just friends group, people you hang out with, etc. And there's leisure groups, recreational groups, etc. But then there's more task-oriented groups that you're gonna see, especially in the workplace. And something that's interesting there is that those can be broken down, the people in them, but also the behaviors that take place are what's called socio-emotional and task orientation. And what that means is that some people take on more of a role making sure that the task gets done, that the job gets done, whatever you've been charged with doing, that's completed effectively. But also it's important to keep the group healthy emotionally, just as important as the task orientation work. So we'll talk more about that. Although different types of groups have distinct primary purposes, most groups include three kinds of communication: climate communication, procedural communication, and task communication. So procedural and task, and climate, we just talked about a moment ago. That basically covers the social, emotional, and the task aspect of group work. Remember, just a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, we talked about communication climates, and so that speaks more to the emotional aspect. Task groups typically include some climate communication and a good deal of procedural communication. I'd clarify that, and I don't think that you can say there's more one or the other. Different groups work depending on the people in them and the task at hand, but both of those are important. Groups are central to work life in this era. Constructive group communication requires that members use effective verbal and nonverbal communication, check perceptions with one another, listen mindfully, build good climates, and adapt communication to each other. So we've talked about a lot of different contexts of communication in this class. I mean, that's what this class is about. But you're seeing the same principles come up over and over again, regardless of the context. So you're going to want to follow these principles, which are in bold to the left on this slide, whatever the context, whether it's a small group, whether it's virtual, etc., any of the other contexts that have come up in this class. We're not going to really make this distinction, but let me just explain what a group is. For a group to exist, the people must interact, be interdependent, have a common goal, and share some rules of conduct. Thus, we can define a group as 3 or more people who interact over time, depend on one another, and follow shared rules of conduct to reach a common goal. Jumping over to the next column, group members are interdependent. They need one another to achieve something, such as develop a policy for the workplace, play a sport, or promote personal growth. This slide differentiates teams, but for our purposes, we're going to use those terms interchangeably. The author contends that teams are more intense in certain ways, but really groups and teams are the same thing. Rules and regulations really bound the activities of groups, especially regulative rules. They can really affect how a group operates. Some groups have really strict defined rules and policies, etc., ways of operating, and others don't. That really affects how things go. Mainly, the most important thing when it comes to group work is that individuals buy into a shared goal. So actually, that's at the group level. Everybody buys into that shared group goal, and then you have individual responsibility to carry out whatever you're charged to do within that group. Both of those are very important. So it operates at a group level and also at an individual level. There's a lot of different kinds of groups: project teams, focus groups, brainstorming, advisor groups, quality control, and decision-making and problem-solving are the ones that we are going to focus on. If we had been in class, we would have spent more time on this. I'm going to try to put together a decision-making activity for this week, but that's a big part of what groups do. They solve problems and make decisions. And who do they do it for? Lo and behold, organizations, which we come to next. So we're going to end on this slide and pick it up in part 2 of this presentation. We're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of groups, including synergy, what's called non-summativity. We're going to talk about the importance of leadership. We're going to talk about equality or inequality of contribution. We're going to talk about something called groupthink, and we'll cover those in the next part of this. But let me just, before I close this part 1 of this presentation, I would just say non-summativity is really what I feel is really interesting and enticing about group work. And that means that the output of a group is not the sum of its parts, meaning that sometimes groups underperform their individual members, but a lot of times groups outperform their individuals. So they're greater than the sum of their parts, which I find really interesting. We'll pick this up in part 2.